The blizzard hit at 11:30 that night, and by midnight, I was barefoot on my own front porch, pounding on a door that would never open again. My mother had called ahead, warned every neighbor, every friend, every soul in Lincoln Falls to ignore me. "She's having another episode," she'd told them. "Don't enable her." So when I stumbled through the snow, hypothermia creeping through my bones, knocking on door after door with hands that could barely form fists, I found only darkness and silence. But they didn't know what they'd unleashed. Survival has a way of turning victims into something far more dangerous. My name is Emily Carter, and for the first 16 years of my life, I believed my mother was a saint. Lincoln Falls. Ohio wasn't much to look at, just another forgotten town where rusted pickup trucks outnumbered college-bound teenagers 3-1. The kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where Friday night football games were religion and getting out was considered either brave or foolish, depending on who you asked. But our little house on Maple Street felt like a sanctuary back then, with its faded yellow siding and the rose bushes Mom tended every morning before her shift at the diner. She used to wake me up at 6:30 every summer morning, not with harsh words or irritation, but with the smell of pancakes drifting up the stairs and her voice calling, "Rise and shine, sunshine, the world's waiting for you." I'd stumble down to find her at the stove, still in her waitressing uniform from the night shift, dark circles under her eyes, but always with that smile, the one that made me feel like I was the most important person in the universe. Those were the golden years, before the cracks started showing. Mom would tell me stories about places she'd dreamed of visiting, cities with museums and theaters and opportunities that Lincoln Falls could never offer. "You're going to see it all someday, baby girl," she'd say, braiding my hair before school. "You're too smart, too special to stay in a place like this." She made it sound like a promise, like my escape was not only possible but inevitable. Dad left when I was 7, and Mom never talked about why. One Tuesday morning, he was there reading his paper and complaining about the coffee being too weak, and by Thursday his closet was empty and Mom was crying into her hands at the kitchen table. I remember asking if he was coming back, and she'd looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes and said, "Some people aren't built for staying, honey, but don't you worry, we're going to be just fine." For a while, we were more than fine. Actually, without Dad's constant criticism and the tension that followed him through every room, our house felt lighter. Mom and I became a team. She'd help me with homework at the kitchen table while my little brother Ben built elaborate Lego cities on the living room floor. She'd take us to the county fair every summer and let us ride every ride twice, even though I knew she was calculating every dollar in her head. When I started showing signs of being academically gifted reading at a high school level in 4th grade, solving math problems that made my teachers do double takes, Mom was my biggest cheerleader. "My brilliant girl," she'd say, practically glowing with pride at parent-teacher conferences. "She's going places, isn't she?" But something started changing around my sophomore year of high school. Subtle at first comments that felt like compliments but left me feeling smaller somehow. When I'd talk about applying to colleges out of state, she'd smile that same smile, but it never quite reached her eyes anymore. "Well, of course you want to explore your options," she'd say. "Though there are perfectly good schools right here in Ohio, closer to family, cheaper, too." The drinking started gradually. A glass of wine with dinner became 2 glasses, then a bottle. She'd say it helped her unwind after dealing with difficult customers all day. And who was I to judge life in Lincoln Falls was hard enough without a teenager questioning her coping mechanisms. But alcohol has a way of stripping away the masks we wear, revealing the raw edges underneath. By my junior year, the morning pancakes had been replaced by tense silences and the smell of stale beer. She'd stay up late, scrolling through Facebook and muttering about people who thought they were too good for their hometown. When I mentioned getting recruited by colleges for academic scholarships, she'd nod absently and change the subject. "College boys aren't going to want a girl who thinks she's smarter than everyone," she said one night, apropos of nothing. We were watching television, and I'd been doing calculus homework during commercial breaks. "Men don't like women who make them feel stupid." I looked up from my textbook, confused. Mom, that's not. I'm just saying. She took another sip from her wine glass. Your dad always said I was too smart for my own good, said it was intimidating. That was the first time she'd mentioned Dad in relation to my future, and something cold settled in my stomach. Ben, curled up between us on the couch, pretended to be asleep, but I could tell from his breathing that he was listening to every word. The real turning point came senior year when the acceptance letter arrived from Northwestern. Full scholarship, everything Mom had once claimed to want for me. I ran inside with the letter, practically vibrating with excitement, expecting her to sweep me into one of those fierce hugs she used to give when I brought home good grades. Instead, she read the letter twice, her face growing paler with each line. Illinois, she said finally. That's awfully far away. Mom, it's Northwestern. Do you know what this means? She folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me. It means my daughter wants to abandon me just like her father did. The words hit like a physical blow. That's not Mom. This is what we've been working toward. You always said. I said a lot of things. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. But I never said I wanted to raise an ungrateful daughter who'd run off the first chance she got, leaving me stuck in this God-forsaken town with nothing to show for 18 years of sacrifice. That night, she made the first phone call to our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. I could hear her voice through the thin walls, painting a picture of a troubled daughter, a family under stress, a mother at her wit's end. Emily's been having some issues lately, she said. Mood swings, making up stories for attention. I'm worried about her mental state. I stood in my bedroom doorway, listening to her systematically poison the well of every relationship I had in our neighborhood, and realized that the mother I'd loved and trusted had been slowly, methodically disappearing for years. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who saw my success not as vindication of her parenting, but as a personal betrayal. By the time the blizzard warning came on the evening news, I should have seen what was coming, but even after everything, I still believed that somewhere deep down, she was still my mom, the woman who used to call me sunshine and promise me the world. I was wrong. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Caroline Carter. That's what I started calling her in my head when Mom felt too painful became a master of psychological warfare disguised as maternal concern. The morning after the Northwestern letter arrived, I woke to find her standing in my doorway at 6:15 a.m., fully dressed and holding a cup of coffee, not bringing me one, just holding hers, like a prop in some twisted performance. We need to talk about your future, she said, her voice artificially bright. I've been thinking about what's best for you. I sat up, hope flickering despite everything. Maybe she'd had time to process, to remember her own dreams of escape. About Northwestern. About reality. She stepped into my room, uninvited, and sat on the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped under her weight, and I caught the faint smell of alcohol on her breath. At 6:15 in the morning, you're 19, Emily, still a child, really. Do you have any idea what it's like to be completely alone in a big city, to have no one who really cares about you? I wouldn't be alone. There would be other students, professors. Strangers. The word came out sharp, cutting. People who see you as competition, not family. People who'll step on you the moment it benefits them. She reached out and touched my face, and her fingers felt cold despite the warm coffee cup she'd been holding. I love you too much to let you make such a devastating mistake. That was her new strategy, love as a weapon. Every conversation became a minefield of guilt and manipulation wrapped in the language of protection. When I tried to research campus housing, she'd hover over my shoulder, pointing out crime statistics and horror stories about roommates who stole or did drugs. When I mentioned orientation programs, she'd counter with articles about college students who'd suffered mental breakdowns from academic pressure. I just worry about you, sweetheart, became her constant refrain. You've always been so sensitive, so prone to anxiety. Remember in 8th grade when you had those panic attacks during finals week? I did remember, And that was the cruelest part. She took genuine moments of vulnerability and weaponized them, turning my own history against me. She'd bring up every time I'd struggled, every moment of weakness, and present them as evidence that I couldn't handle independence. But it was Ben who bore the worst of it. My 15-year-old brother became her unwilling accomplice, caught between loyalty to me and terror of her unpredictable moods. I'd find him in his room after particularly brutal family discussions, curled up with his headphones on, trying to block out the sound of her voice still echoing through the house. "She's just scared," he whispered to me one night when Caroline had passed out on the couch, an empty wine bottle on the coffee table. "She keeps saying you're going to leave and never come back, just like Dad." "Ben, that's not—" "I know." His voice cracked. "But she doesn't. And when she gets like this—" He gestured toward the living room, where Caroline's snores rattled through the thin walls. "She says things about you, about how you think you're better than us." The phone calls to the neighbors intensified. I'd catch fragments through the heating vents. Her voice carried up from the kitchen with an intimacy that made my skin crawl. She spoke about me the way you'd discuss a beloved pet with a concerning behavioral problem with worried affection that barely concealed her fundamental belief that I couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions. "Emily's been so stressed about college applications," I heard her tell Mrs. Patterson over the fence one afternoon. "Sometimes I worry she's losing touch with reality. Yesterday, she insisted she'd been accepted to Northwestern, but when I asked to see the letter, she became very agitated and claimed I was trying to sabotage her." I was standing at my bedroom window, watching her performance, holding the acceptance letter in my hands, the letter she'd read herself, the letter that was real and legitimate and sitting right there on my desk. Mrs. Patterson made sympathetic noises, and Caroline continued her campaign of character assassination disguised as maternal concern. "I've read that brilliant children sometimes struggle with the transition to adulthood, all that pressure to achieve. You know, it can cause delusions of grandeur." That night at dinner, she smiled at me across the table like nothing had happened. "How was your day, sweetheart?" I pushed food around my plate, no longer hungry. "Fine. You've been so quiet lately. Are you feeling all right? You're not having any more of those episodes. Are you—" Ben's fork clattered against his plate. Episodes. She was creating a narrative, building a foundation for whatever she had planned next. "I'm fine, Mom." "Caroline," she corrected gently. "I've been thinking maybe it would be good for you to talk to someone, a professional. Dr. Mitchell has been so helpful with other families in town dealing with similar challenges." Dr. Mitchell, who'd known Caroline since high school. Dr. Mitchell, who treated half the town and believed whatever version of events his patients presented. Dr. Mitchell, who could write notes in my file about delusions and instability that would follow me for years. "I don't need therapy." "Of course you don't think you do, honey." Her smile was patient, indulgent. "That's part of the problem." By February, the campaign had escalated beyond whispered phone calls. Caroline began attending PTA meetings again for the first time in years, not because she suddenly cared about school board elections, but because it gave her access to a wider audience for her performance. She'd corner other parents in the grocery store, her voice heavy with manufactured worry as she discussed her gifted but troubled daughter. "It's so difficult," she'd say, and I swear she could produce tears on command. "You try to give them everything, but sometimes you wonder if you've pushed them too hard. Emily's been having such a difficult time lately, making up stories, lashing out when we try to help. I'm terrified she might hurt herself if she doesn't get the support she needs." The worst part was watching people's faces change when they saw me around town. Neighbors who'd known me my entire life suddenly regarded me with cautious sympathy, like I was a fragile thing that might shatter if they spoke too loudly. Teachers pulled me aside to ask if I was coping well with stress. The guidance counselor called me to her office twice in 1 week to discuss managing expectations. I started to understand what gaslighting actually meant. It wasn't just lying, it was the systematic erosion of reality itself. Caroline was rewriting history, transforming my achievements into symptoms and my independence into pathology. She was so skilled at it that sometimes, lying in bed at night, I'd find myself questioning my own memories. Had I really been accepted to Northwestern? Was I really as capable as I'd believed? But then I'd look at the letter, hidden now between my mattress and box spring, and I'd remember I was not crazy. I was not delusional. I was not the troubled teenager she was painting me to be. I was simply inconvenient to her new narrative, where my success was a threat and my escape was an abandonment. And as the winter deepened and the first blizzard warnings appeared on the weather forecast, I began to realize that Caroline Carter was capable of far more than psychological manipulation. She was capable of anything that would keep me exactly where she wanted me trapped, dependent, and completely under her control. The storm was coming. In more ways than one, the blizzard warnings started appearing on the local news 3 days before it hit. Historic storm system approaching, the meteorologist announced with barely contained excitement. Potentially the worst winter storm Ohio has seen in 20 years. Residents are advised to stock up on essentials and avoid all unnecessary travel. Lincoln Falls went into full panic mode. The grocery store ran out of bread and milk by Thursday afternoon. Hardware stores sold out of rock salt and snow shovels. Everyone knew the drill when a storm this size was coming. You battened down the hatches and waited it out. Everyone except Caroline, who seemed strangely energized by the approaching chaos. I first noticed it Thursday evening when she came home from her shift at the diner with an unusual spring in her step. She'd been picking up extra hours all week, but instead of looking exhausted, she seemed almost excited. "Big storm coming," she announced, setting down grocery bags filled with canned goods and bottled water. "They're saying it could dump 2 feet of snow, maybe more." Ben looked up from his homework at the kitchen table. "School's already canceled for tomorrow and Monday." Good. Caroline started unpacking supplies with methodical precision. "We'll need to stick together as a family. Weather like this, you can't trust anyone but your own blood." The way she said family made something cold crawl up my spine. There was an undertone there, a possessiveness that felt more like a threat than comfort. Friday morning, I woke to the sound of Caroline's voice drifting up from the kitchen. She was on the phone, and even through the floorboards, I could hear the artificial concern in her tone. "Oh, I'm so worried about Emily," she was saying. "She's been having such a hard time lately, and with this storm coming, well, you know how unstable she's been. I'm terrified she might do something desperate if she gets overwhelmed." I crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear. No, please don't feel like you need to check on her," Caroline continued. "I think the best thing for everyone is if she has some space to work through her issues. If she comes to you asking for help or making wild claims, well, you understand. Sometimes the kindest thing is not to enable someone who's clearly struggling with reality." My blood turned to ice water. She was making calls, multiple calls, from the sound of it, systematically contacting every neighbor, every family friend, every person in our small social circle. I padded back to my room and pressed my ear to the heating vent that connected to the kitchen. Caroline's voice came through clearly now. "I appreciate you understanding, Mrs. Patterson. It's just so hard when your own child—" "Yes, exactly. Sometimes tough love is the only option. If Emily shows up at your door this weekend, especially during the storm, please just don't answer. I know it sounds harsh, but Dr. Mitchell says enabling her delusions will only make things worse." Dr. Mitchell, the family doctor she'd been threatening to drag me to for months, the man who'd apparently already diagnosed me without ever meeting me. "She might try to tell you I've locked her out or some other dramatic story," Caroline continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "But we both know Emily has a tendency toward exaggeration. I just need her to understand that actions have consequences." My legs gave out. I sank to the floor of my bedroom, back pressed against the wall, as the full scope of her plan began to unfold. The storm wasn't just weather to her, it was an opportunity, a chance to teach me a lesson about what happened to daughters who tried to leave their mothers behind. I spent the day in a state of numb disbelief, watching Caroline move through the house with quiet efficiency. She checked the windows, tested the flashlights, arranged the emergency supplies, but there was something theatrical about it all, like she was performing preparation rather than actually preparing. "Emily, honey," she called up the stairs around 4 o'clock. "Could you help me bring in some things from the car? There are a few more bags of groceries." Something in her tone made me hesitate. Too sweet, too casual. "In a minute," I called back. "Oh, come on. Don't make me carry everything myself. The storm's going to start any time now." I looked out my bedroom window. The sky was gray and heavy, but no snow was falling yet. Still, I pulled on my slippers and headed downstairs. Caroline was standing by the front door, car keys in hand. "I left a few bags in the trunk," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just run out and grab them. Would you? I need to check on the basement windows." She pressed the keys into my hand and disappeared toward the back of the house before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, keys cold in my palm, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. But what was I supposed to do? Refuse to help bring in groceries? I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The wind was picking up, cutting through my thin pajamas and making me shiver. Caroline's old sedan was parked in the driveway, and I could see the outline of grocery bags through the rear window. I hurried to the car, fumbling with the keys in the cold. The trunk popped open, revealing 3 bags of what looked like more canned goods and batteries. I grabbed all 3, awkward and heavy in my arms, and turned back toward the house. That's when I heard it, the solid, unmistakable sound of the front door closing, followed by the click of the deadbolt sliding into place. I dropped the bags, groceries scattering across the driveway. "Caroline," I shouted, running to the door and pounding on it with my fists. "Caroline, open the door." Silence. I tried the handle, knowing it would be locked but needing to confirm my worst fears. The door didn't budge. "Mom," I screamed, abandoning all pretense. "Please open the door." Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could see her silhouette. She was standing there, just watching, waiting. "I know you can hear me." My voice was getting hoarse, panic making it crack. "What are you doing? Let me in." The silhouette moved closer to the door, and Caroline's voice came through the glass, muffled but clear. "You want to leave so badly, Emily. You think you're too good for this family, for this town. Well, here's your chance to see what the real world is like. What it's like when you don't have anyone to take care of you." I pressed my face against the cold glass, trying to see her expression. "Caroline, please. I'm sorry about Northwestern. We can talk about this. Just let me inside." "I called Northwestern this morning," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Told them you'd had a mental health crisis and wouldn't be attending. Explained that you've been making up stories, having episodes. They were very understanding." The words hit me like physical blows. "You can't, that's not—" "I can, and I did, because I'm your mother, and I know what's best for you. You're going to stay right here in Lincoln Falls where you belong, where I can keep an eye on you." I could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, fat and lazy in the gray twilight. The temperature was dropping fast. "Caroline, I'm in my pajamas. I don't have shoes. You can't leave me out here." "You should have thought of that before you decided to betray your family." Her silhouette moved away from the door, and I heard her footsteps retreating into the house. I pounded on the door until my fists were numb, screaming until my throat was raw. But the house remained silent except for the sound of the wind picking up and the soft whisper of snow beginning to fall in earnest. By 8 o'clock, it was a full blizzard, and I was barefoot on my own front porch, locked out by the woman who'd given birth to me, with nowhere to go and no one to help me. Or so I thought. By 9 o'clock, The storm had transformed Lincoln Falls into a frozen hellscape. Snow fell so thick I could barely see 3 feet in front of me, and the wind cut through my thin pajamas like razors made of ice. My feet had gone from painful to numb, then past numb into something that felt like burning. But I refused to give up. I refused to die on Caroline's front porch like some tragic cautionary tale she could use to justify her actions for the rest of her miserable life. The first house I tried was the Pattersons, our immediate neighbors. Mrs. Patterson had been bringing us casseroles since Dad left, had watched me grow up, had praised my report cards and asked about my college plans. Surely she would see through Caroline's lies when faced with the reality of a 19-year-old girl freezing to death in a blizzard. I pounded on their front door until my knuckles cracked and bled, leaving red smears on the white painted wood. The porch light was on, and I could see the blue glow of a television through their living room window. They were home. They were warm and safe and watching the news coverage of the storm that was slowly killing me. "Mrs. Patterson," I screamed over the wind. "Please, it's Emily. I need help." The television volume went up. I pressed my face to their front window, cupping my hands around my eyes to peer inside. Mrs. Patterson was sitting in her recliner, deliberately not looking toward the door. Her husband was on the couch, newspaper held high in front of his face like a shield. They could hear me. They knew I was there. And they were choosing to ignore me. "Please," I whispered against the glass, my breath fogging the window. "I'm freezing. I just need to get warm." Mrs. Patterson reached for the remote and turned the volume up again. I stumbled away from their house, my feet screaming with each step. The snow was already ankle-deep and getting deeper by the minute. My pajama pants were soaked through, clinging to my legs like icy bandages. The next house belonged to the Morgans, who had a daughter my age. Surely they would understand, parent to parent, that no child deserved to be left outside in weather like this. But when I reached their porch, sobbing with cold and desperation, the same scene played out. Lights on, people home, doors locked tight. I could see Mr. De Morgan peek through the curtains, see me standing there shivering, and then quickly look away. "I know you can see me," I screamed, beating on their door. "I know Caroline called you, but I'm not crazy. I'm not having an episode. I'm dying out here." The porch light went out. House after house, the pattern repeated. The Kellys, who had employed me as a babysitter for 3 years, the Rodriguezes, whose son I'd tutored in math, the elderly Flemings, who used to slip me $5 bills for helping with their groceries. Every single one of them had been reached by Caroline's poison, and every single one of them had chosen to believe her over the evidence of their own eyes. At the Hendersons' house, I was so desperate I tried their back door, their basement entrance, even tapped on their bedroom window. Nothing. Mr. Henderson actually came to the window, looked directly at me through the glass, and then closed the curtains. By 10:30, I had been outside for over 2 hours. My speech was slurring from the cold, and I could no longer feel my feet at all. Dark spots danced at the edges of my vision, and I knew I was entering the early stages of hypothermia, the kind that killed people. I tried to count how many houses I'd been to. 8, 10. The entire neighborhood had become a maze of locked doors and closed hearts. Caroline had been thorough in her preparation. She'd painted me as a troubled girl prone to dramatic outbursts, and in a small town where everyone knew everyone, reputation was everything. Who would risk getting involved with a mentally unstable teenager when her own mother had warned them away? At the Brennan's house, I didn't even make it to the door before Mr. Brennan opened it a crack and called out, "Emily, you need to go home. Your mother is worried sick about you." "She locked me out," I shouted back, my voice barely audible over the wind. "She called Northwestern and canceled my acceptance. She's trying to keep me here." "Honey, you're not making sense." Mrs. Brennan appeared beside her husband, her face creased with what looked like genuine concern. "You're obviously having some kind of breakdown. Go home and get help." I can't go home. She won't let me in." They exchanged that look the one adults share when they think a teenager is being dramatic, the one that said they'd already decided I was the problem. "We can't enable this behavior, sweetheart," Mrs. Brennan said gently, as if she was doing me a favor. "Your mother explained about your condition. The best thing we can do is encourage you to get the help you need." The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than all my screaming. I sank to my knees in their front yard, snow immediately soaking through my pajama bottoms. This was it. This was how I was going to die, not from the storm itself, but from the collective cruelty of an entire community that had chosen comfort over compassion. Caroline had orchestrated this perfectly. In the morning, they would find my body in the snow, and she would be the grieving mother who had lost her troubled daughter to a tragic accident. If only she had come home, Caroline would sob at my funeral. If only she hadn't been having one of her episodes. And everyone would believe her. They would comfort her in her loss and never question why a mother would leave her child outside to freeze. Because Caroline had spent months laying the groundwork, making me the unreliable narrator of my own life. I forced myself back to my feet, swaying against the wind. If I was going to die, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I would keep knocking on doors until my heart stopped or my body gave out completely. I would force them to see me, to acknowledge what they were choosing to ignore. But as I stumbled toward the next house, a small ranch I didn't recognize, with unfamiliar cars in the driveway, I realized something important. This house was dark except for a single lamp in what looked like a living room window. No television glow, no sound of voices. And more importantly, no sign that Caroline had been here yet with her web of lies. I had found the one house in Lincoln Falls where the phone hadn't rung, where the seeds of doubt hadn't been planted. My last chance. With the final reserves of my strength, I dragged myself up their front steps and raised my numb fist to knock on the door. Behind me, through the swirling snow, I could just make out the warm glow of Caroline's house. She was probably sitting by the fireplace, sipping wine, watching the clock and waiting to see how long it would take for her lesson to sink in. She had no idea that some doors in this town were still capable of opening. She had no idea that her perfect plan was about to fall apart. The door opened before I could even knock. A woman in her 50s stood there, backlit by warm yellow light, her face a mask of shock and horror as she took in the sight of me, a half-frozen teenager in soaked pajamas, shaking uncontrollably on her doorstep. "Oh my God," she breathed, and without hesitation, she reached out and pulled me inside. David, get down here now." The warmth hit me like a physical force, and I collapsed onto their hardwood floor, my legs finally giving out completely. The woman I would later learn her name was Sarah Harris, immediately wrapped a thick blanket around my shoulders while shouting for her husband. "What happened to you?" she asked, crouching beside me. "Where are your shoes? Your coat?" I tried to speak, but my teeth were chattering so violently I could barely form words. "House," I managed. Locked out." David Harris appeared at the top of the stairs, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes that immediately filled with alarm when he saw me. "Jesus Christ. Sarah, is that hypothermia?" "Call 911, Sarah ordered, never taking her hands off me. She was rubbing my arms through the blanket, trying to get circulation back. "Tell them we have a severe cold exposure case." "No," I whispered, panic cutting through the fog in my brain. "Please, no hospital. Caroline will—" "Honey, you're going to lose fingers if we don't get you medical attention," Sarah said gently but firmly. "Your lips are blue. You could die." Die! The word hit me like a slap. I had almost died. Caroline had almost killed me with her lesson in family loyalty, and she would have let it happen, would have found my body in the morning and played the grieving mother for the cameras. David was already on the phone with emergency services, giving them the address and describing my condition. Sarah disappeared for a moment and returned with dry clothes, sweatpants, and a hoodie that smelled like fabric softener and normal family life. "Let's get you out of these wet things," she said. "Can you stand?" I couldn't. My legs were useless, my feet completely numb. Sarah and David had to carry me to their bathroom, where Sarah helped me change while David waited outside. When she pulled off my soaked socks, we both stared at my feet in horror. My toes were white and waxy looking, with patches that had turned an alarming shade of gray. "Frostbite," Sarah whispered. "David, tell them to hurry." By the time the ambulance arrived at 11:45, I was wrapped in blankets on their couch with a cup of hot chocolate I couldn't hold steady in my hands. The EMTs were two young men who took one look at my feet and immediately started talking about potential amputation of toes. "How long were you outside?" one of them asked while checking my vital signs. "Almost 3 hours," Sarah answered when I couldn't find my voice. "In pajamas, no shoes." The EMT looked incredulous. "Where were your parents?" And that's when I broke. All the adrenaline, all the survival instinct that had kept me moving through the storm finally gave way, and I sobbed out the whole story. How Caroline had systematically poisoned the entire neighborhood against me. How she'd canceled my college acceptance out of spite. How she'd locked me outside in a blizzard because I dared to want something beyond the suffocating prison of Lincoln Falls. The EMTs exchanged glances. Sarah gripped my hand tighter. "Ma'am, we're mandated reporters," one of them said carefully. "What you're describing is attempted murder." Attempted murder. The words hung in the air like ice crystals, cold and sharp and undeniably true. At the hospital, they rushed me into the emergency room where doctors worked to slowly warm my extremities and assess the damage. The diagnosis was severe hypothermia and second-degree frostbite on 3 toes of my left foot. I would need surgery and weeks of recovery, but I would keep all my digits. "You're lucky," Dr. Patel told me as she examined my feet. "Another hour outside and we'd be talking about amputations. Maybe worse." Lucky. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Lucky that the Harris family had moved to Lincoln Falls just 2 months ago. Lucky that Caroline hadn't had time to reach them with her web of lies. Lucky that there were still people in the world who would open their doors to a stranger in need. The police arrived around 2 a.m. 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else than taking a statement from a half-frozen teenager about parental abuse. Officer Martinez was sympathetic but skeptical. Officer Thompson kept checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. "So your mother locked you out of the house," Martinez said, pen poised over his notepad. "Did you have a fight? Were you being disciplined for something?" "She locked me out because I got accepted to Northwestern," I said for the 3rd time. "She called the school and told them I was mentally unstable so they'd rescind my acceptance." Thompson snorted. "Come on, kid. Parents don't lock their children outside in blizzards because of college. What really happened? Were you drinking, using drugs?" "Check the neighbors," I said, frustration making my voice stronger. "Call them and ask what Caroline told them about me. Ask them why no one would let me inside." The officers exchanged that look, the same one I'd seen all night from adults who thought they knew better. The look that said troubled teenager making up stories for attention. "We'll look into it," Martinez said, but I could tell he didn't believe me. After they left, Sarah Harris returned to my bedside. She'd been there all night, refusing to leave until she knew I was okay. "I called your house," she said quietly, "to let your mother know you were safe." My heart stopped. What did she say? "She said you'd run away after a family argument. Said you'd done it before and always came back when you got hungry or cold enough." Sarah's face was grim. "She thanked me for calling and said she'd pick you up in the morning." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Even faced with evidence that her plan had nearly killed me, Caroline was sticking to her script. I was the problem child, the runaway, the troubled daughter who couldn't be trusted. "She's going to get away with it," I whispered. "No one will believe me." Sarah squeezed my hand. "I believe you." 3 words. After hours of being dismissed, gaslighted, and nearly murdered, 3 simple words from a stranger who owed me nothing. "The neighbors really wouldn't let you in?" she asked. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. She called them all, told them I was having a mental breakdown, that helping me would just enable my delusions. "That's not maternal concern," Sarah said flatly. "That's premeditated assault." As dawn broke over Lincoln Falls, painting the snow-covered town in shades of pink and gold, I lay in that hospital bed and felt something new growing in my chest. Not fear, not despair, but a cold, crystalline fury that matched the ice still forming on the windows. Caroline thought she'd taught me a lesson about family loyalty and knowing my place. She thought she'd broken me, forced me to accept the small, suffocating life she'd planned for me. But all she'd really done was show me exactly who she was and exactly what the people of Lincoln Falls were capable of when it suited them. She'd stripped away my last illusions about maternal love and community compassion. And in doing so, she'd freed me to become something she'd never anticipated, someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. The real lesson was about to begin, and this time, I would be the teacher. Caroline arrived at the hospital at 7:30 a.m., playing her role to perfection. I watched through the window of my room as she hurried across the parking lot, her face a mask of maternal concern. She'd even dressed the part, no makeup, hair slightly disheveled, wearing the old cardigan she saved for her most vulnerable moments. When she entered my room, Sarah Harris was still there, dozing in the chair beside my bed. Caroline's eyes flicked to her with barely concealed annoyance before focusing on me with practiced worry. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed, rushing to my bedside. "I was so terrified when Mrs. Harris called. Are you hurt? Are you okay?" The performance was flawless. If I hadn't lived through the truth, I might have believed her myself. "I'm fine," I said flatly. "Thanks to the Harris family." Caroline's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't understand what happened. You were supposed to be in your room. When I went to check on you this morning, you were gone. The front door was unlocked. I thought maybe you'd gone for a walk and gotten lost in the storm." Even now, even with the evidence of frostbite on my feet and hypothermia in my medical chart, she was rewriting history, making herself the concerned mother and me the reckless child who'd wandered off into danger. Sarah stirred in her chair, then sat up straighter as she took in Caroline's presence. "Mrs. Carter, I presume—" "Yes, and you must be Mrs. Harris. I can't thank you enough for helping Emily. She's been going through such a difficult time lately." Caroline's voice carried that familiar note of long-suffering patience. "I hope she wasn't too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Sarah said, but her tone was ice-cold. "Though I have to ask, how exactly does a 19-year-old end up locked outside in a blizzard wearing only pajamas?" Caroline's smile faltered for just a moment. "Locked outside. Oh dear, Emily's been having some episodes lately. Confusion, making up stories. The doctors think it might be stress-related psychosis from all the pressure she's been putting on herself about college." "That's interesting," Sarah said, standing up. "Because when the police took her statement last night, Emily was very coherent about exactly what happened. She said you deliberately locked her out after tricking her into going outside without proper clothing." "The police?" Caroline's mask slipped entirely for a second, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Why would anyone call the police? This is a family matter." "Attempted murder is never just a family matter." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Caroline recovered quickly, putting her hand to her chest in a gesture of wounded innocence. "I can't believe you'd suggest such a thing. I would never hurt my daughter. Emily is everything to me." She turned to me with tears that appeared on command. "Honey, you know I love you. You know I'd never do anything to harm you." And that's when Ben appeared in the doorway. My 15-year-old brother looked like he hadn't slept all night. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and something else. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. Ben. Caroline's voice was sharp with surprise. What are you doing here? You should be at home. I heard you leave this morning, he said quietly, not looking at either of us. I followed you. Well, that was silly. Emily's fine now, so we can all go home and... I heard the phone calls. The words were so quiet I almost missed them, but Caroline heard them clearly enough. Her face went white. What phone calls, sweetheart? Ben finally looked up, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Resolution. He'd made a decision, and he was going to see it through no matter what it cost him. All of them, he said. Mrs. Patterson, the Morgans, the Kellys, everyone. I heard you tell them Emily was having a breakdown. I heard you tell them not to help her if she came to their houses. Caroline's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Ben, honey, you're confused. You must have misunderstood. I recorded one of them. The silence that followed was deafening. Caroline stared at Ben like he'd grown a second head, while Sarah leaned forward with intense interest. You what? Caroline whispered. Ben pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I've been recording things for weeks, ever since you started saying Emily was crazy. I knew it wasn't true, but I was scared to say anything because... His voice cracked. Because I didn't want you to lock me out too. He swiped through his phone and found what he was looking for. When he pressed play, Caroline's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably damning. I know it sounds harsh, but Dr. Mitchell says enabling her delusions will only make things worse. If Emily shows up at your door this weekend, especially during the storm, please just don't answer. She might try to tell you I've locked her out or some other dramatic story, but we both know Emily has a tendency toward exaggeration. The recording continued for another minute, with Caroline laying out her plan in methodical detail. How she needed the neighbors to ignore me so I'd learn my lesson about family loyalty. How a night in the cold might teach me to appreciate everything she'd sacrificed for me. When it ended, the room was silent except for the steady beep of my heart monitor. Sarah was the first to speak. That's a confession to attempted murder. Caroline's mask was completely gone now, replaced by something ugly and desperate. You don't understand. Emily was going to leave. She was going to abandon me just like her father did. I had to make her see... You had to make her see what Sarah's voice was deadly quiet, that you're willing to let her freeze to death rather than let her have her own life. She's ungrateful. The words exploded out of Caroline like poison from a wound. After everything I've done for her, everything I've sacrificed, she wants to run off to some fancy college and forget I exist. So you decided to kill her? I wasn't going to let her die. Caroline was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. I was just going to teach her a lesson, make her understand what it feels like to have nowhere to go, no one to help you. I was going to let her back in before anything really bad happened. When... I spoke for the first time since she'd arrived, my voice hoarse but steady. When were you going to let me back in? Caroline. After I lost some toes? After I went into a coma? Or were you just going to wait until you found my body in the morning and then play the grieving mother? Don't call me Caroline, I'm your mother. No, I said, and the certainty in my voice surprised even me. You're not. A mother doesn't systematically destroy her child's future out of spite. A mother doesn't orchestrate a campaign to turn an entire neighborhood against her daughter. And a mother sure as hell doesn't lock her child outside in a blizzard and then lie about it. Caroline looked around the room desperately, like she was searching for someone to back up her version of reality. But Sarah was already on her phone, calling the police back. Ben was clutching his phone like a lifeline, the evidence of Caroline's guilt literally in his hands. The neighbors, Caroline said suddenly, grasping at straws. They'll tell you Emily's been having problems. They'll confirm that she's been unstable. Because you told them to think that, Ben said. His voice was stronger now, more confident. "I heard those calls too. You've been lying about Emily for months, making everyone think she was crazy so they wouldn't believe her when she tried to tell them the truth." The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, and Caroline's face crumpled with the realization that her carefully constructed world was falling apart. All her manipulation, all her gaslighting, all her months of preparation undone by a 15-year-old boy with a smartphone and a conscience. "This is all wrong," she whispered. "I'm the victim here. I'm the one who's been abandoned and betrayed." But as the police officers entered my hospital room for the second time in 8 hours, this time with handcuffs and a warrant, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The pure, crystalline satisfaction of being believed. The truth, it turned out, was more powerful than all of Caroline's lies combined. And now everyone in Lincoln Falls was about to learn exactly what kind of woman they'd been enabling all these months. The reckoning had begun. The weeks that followed Caroline's arrest were a masterclass in methodical destruction. While she sat in the county jail awaiting trial, I began the careful work of dismantling everything she'd built, not just her lies, but her entire carefully constructed life. Sarah Harris had connected me with a lawyer from the Legal Aid Society, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Martinez who specialized in family abuse cases. Rebecca took one look at Ben's recordings, the hospital records, and the police reports, and her eyes lit up with the kind of professional hunger that promised justice. "This isn't just attempted murder," she told me during our first meeting. "This is systematic psychological abuse, destruction of educational opportunities, and conspiracy. Your mother didn't just try to hurt you, she orchestrated a community-wide campaign to isolate and endanger you." But Rebecca wasn't just interested in criminal charges. She was interested in making Caroline pay in every way possible. "Tell me about Northwestern," she said, pulling out a legal pad. "Do you have documentation of your acceptance?" I produced the letter, now creased and worn from being hidden under my mattress for months. Rebecca's smile was predatory. "And you have evidence that your mother called the university pretending to be you." "Ben recorded that call too," I said. She didn't know he was listening. Within 48 hours, Rebecca had contacted Northwestern's admissions office. The conversation, as she later told me, was illuminating. Caroline had indeed called, claiming to be me, and had spun a story about severe mental health issues that required immediate psychiatric intervention. The university, faced with what they believed was a student in crisis, had reluctantly rescinded the full scholarship offer. "They're horrified," Rebecca reported. "Not only did your mother commit fraud by impersonating you, but she interfered with your constitutional right to education. Northwestern is prepared to fully reinstate your acceptance and scholarship, and they're considering their own legal action against your mother for fraud." But that was just at the beginning. While Caroline sat in jail, unable to make the $50,000 bail, I began systematically documenting every lie she'd told, every person she'd manipulated, every aspect of the psychological warfare she'd waged against me. Ben became my secret weapon. It turned out he'd been recording things for months. Not just the phone calls, but also Caroline's drunken rants about my ingratitude and her detailed plans to teach me a lesson. The recordings painted a picture of a woman consumed by resentment and control, someone who saw her daughter's success not as a point of pride, but as a personal attack. In one particularly damning clip, Caroline could be heard slurring her words as she talked to herself while drinking. "She thinks she's so smart, so much better than me. Well, we'll see how smart she is when nobody believes a word she says." I took these recordings to Dr. Mitchell, the family physician Caroline had been citing as an authority on my supposed mental instability. The man who'd never actually met me but had apparently diagnosed me with stress-related psychosis. Dr. Mitchell's office was exactly what I'd expected: beige walls, motivational posters, and the kind of comfortable mediocrity that small-town professionals cultivated. He was a thin man in his 60s with thinning hair and the slightly superior expression of someone who'd spent his career being the smartest person in every room. Emily, he said as I entered his office, I heard about the unfortunate incident with your mother. I hope you're getting the help you need. Actually, Dr. Mitchell, I'm here about the help you've been providing, I said, setting my phone on his desk. I understand you've been consulted about my mental health. His face flushed slightly. Your mother was concerned about some behavioral changes. As a family friend, I offered some general guidance. Without ever examining me, without ever meeting me, without any medical basis whatsoever, I pressed play on Ben's recording of Caroline quoting Dr. Mitchell's supposed professional opinion about my delusions. The color drained from his face as he listened to Caroline citing his authority for her claims that I was mentally unstable and prone to making up stories. I never said those conversations were informal, between friends. I never provided a professional diagnosis. But you didn't correct her when she told people you had, did you? You let her use your medical credentials to support her lies about my mental state. Do you know what that's called, Dr. Mitchell? He didn't answer, but I could see the knowledge in his eyes. It's called practicing medicine without proper examination. It's called allowing your professional credentials to be used fraudulently. The state medical board is going to be very interested in how a licensed physician allowed his name to be used to support false psychological diagnoses. I left his office with a written statement admitting that he had never examined me, never diagnosed me with anything, and had been misunderstood when Caroline claimed he'd confirmed my mental instability. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to destroy his credibility if he ever tried to support Caroline's version of events. Next came the neighbors. The beauty of small-town dynamics is that they cut both ways. The same gossip network that had allowed Caroline to poison people against me could just as easily turn against her. And now that she was in jail for attempted murder, suddenly everyone was very interested in reconsidering their previous judgments. I started with Mrs. Patterson, who answered her door with obvious reluctance when she saw me standing on her porch. Emily, she said nervously, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. Are you sorry that I almost died, Mrs. Patterson? Or are you sorry that you chose to ignore a teenager freezing on your doorstep? Her face crumpled. Your mother said, she told us you were having problems, that helping you would just make things worse. And you believed her, even when you could see me dying in front of your house. You believed her over the evidence of your own eyes. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and showed her the video I'd posted on social media the night before my account of what had happened, complete with photos of my frostbitten feet and audio clips of Caroline's recorded confessions. The video had already been shared 300 times by people from Lincoln Falls, and the comments were illuminating. People were furious, not just at Caroline, but at the neighbors who'd turned their backs on me. The same community dynamics that had worked in Caroline's favor were now working against everyone who'd enabled her. People are starting to ask questions, Mrs. Patterson, about who else knew Caroline was lying, about who else participated in her plan to isolate me. The police are going to want to interview everyone who ignored me that night. But we didn't know it was part of a plan, she protested. Didn't you? When Caroline called you and specifically told you not to help me if I came to your door, when she warned you I might claim she'd locked me out, that sounds like advanced planning to me. I visited 12 houses that day, having the same conversation with 12 families who'd chosen convenience over conscience. By evening, 3 of them had contacted Rebecca to offer statements supporting my version of events. By the end of the week, 7 more had followed suit. The community that had once united behind Caroline's lies was now fracturing under the weight of the truth, and with each crack, more evidence of her systematic manipulation came to light. A server at the diner where Caroline worked came forward with stories of how Caroline had badmouthed me to customers, painting me as an ungrateful daughter who was too good for Lincoln Falls. A clerk at the grocery store revealed that Caroline had been spreading rumors about my mental state for months, asking people to keep an eye on me because I was becoming unpredictable. Each revelation added another charge to Caroline's growing legal troubles: defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, conspiracy. The attempted murder charge was just the beginning. But my favorite discovery came when Rebecca subpoenaed Caroline's phone records. It turned out she'd made over 40 calls the day before the blizzard, systematically contacting every person in our social circle with her lies about my mental state and her instructions to ignore me if I sought help. 40 calls. 40 deliberate decisions to endanger my life. 40 pieces of evidence that this hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment, but a carefully orchestrated plan to potentially kill me. As I sat in Rebecca's office reviewing the phone records, I felt that familiar cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. Caroline had been so proud of her manipulation, so confident in her ability to control the narrative. She'd documented her own crimes with obsessive thoroughness. "This is more than enough for a conviction," Rebecca said, spreading the evidence across her desk like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "Your mother is going to prison for a very long time." But prison wasn't enough. Not after what she'd tried to do. Not after the months of psychological torture, the sabotaged college acceptance, the systematic destruction of my relationships and reputation. "What about civil damages?" I asked. Rebecca's smile was sharp as a blade. "Now, that's an interesting question. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, loss of educational opportunities, medical expenses, punitive damages for the deliberate nature of her actions." She pulled out a calculator and started adding figures. "We could be looking at a substantial settlement." "How substantial?" "Well, a full scholarship to Northwestern is worth about $300,000 over 4 years. Medical expenses and therapy costs, another $50,000. Punitive damages for attempted murder." She looked up at me. "Are you familiar with your mother's assets?" I thought about the house Caroline was so desperate to keep me trapped in, the life insurance policy she'd taken out after Dad left, the savings account she thought I didn't know about. "I'm about to become very familiar with them," I said. By the time Caroline's trial began 6 weeks later, I had systematically destroyed every pillar of the life she'd built: her reputation, her relationships, her credibility, her financial security. Everything she'd used as weapons against me was now turned against her. The woman who'd tried to teach me about the consequences of betraying family was about to learn what real consequences looked like. And I was going to be there to watch every minute of it. The trial of Caroline Carter became the most talked about event in Lincoln Falls' recent history. The courthouse was packed every day, with people who'd once whispered about my mental instability now craning their necks to hear every damning detail of the case against my mother. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my back straight and my eyes never leaving Caroline's face as witness after witness testified to her systematic campaign of manipulation and attempted murder. Ben's recordings played through the courtroom speakers, Caroline's voice echoing off the walls as she methodically arranged for my potential death. The neighbors who'd turned me away that night were called to testify, each one looking smaller and more ashamed as they admitted to receiving Caroline's calls and following her instructions to ignore me. Mrs. Patterson broke down crying on the stand as she described watching me pound on her door while deliberately turning up her television to drown out my pleas. "I thought I was helping," she sobbed. Caroline said Emily was having a breakdown, that enabling her would make things worse. I never imagined. "You never imagined what, Mrs. Patterson?" the prosecutor asked gently. "That a 19-year-old girl might actually freeze to death while you watched television." Dr. Mitchell's testimony was particularly satisfying. He sat hunched in the witness chair, his professional reputation in tatters as he admitted to allowing his medical credentials to be used to support false diagnoses. The state medical board had already opened an investigation, and his practice was hemorrhaging patients by the day. Caroline's defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, tried to paint her as a concerned mother driven to desperation by an ungrateful daughter. But the evidence was overwhelming. Ben's recordings. The phone records showing 40 calls made the day before the blizzard. The hospital records documenting my hypothermia and frostbite. the statements from Northwestern confirming that Caroline had fraudulently canceled my acceptance. On the third day of testimony, I was called to the witness stand. As I walked past Caroline's table, she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger or manipulation or false concern, but genuine fear. She was finally beginning to understand that the daughter she'd tried to control and destroy had become something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. I spoke for 2 hours, my voice steady and clear as I detailed years of psychological abuse that had culminated in attempted murder. I described the systematic gaslighting, the deliberate sabotage of my relationships and opportunities, the careful construction of a narrative that painted me as mentally unstable and unreliable. The defendant didn't just lock me outside in a blizzard, I told the jury. She spent months preparing the ground so that when she tried to kill me, no one would believe my version of events. She turned an entire community into accomplices in her plan. When Caroline's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to suggest that I was exaggerating or seeking attention, I remained calm. Every attack on my credibility was met with documentary evidence. Every attempt to paint me as the problem child was countered with recordings of Caroline's own words revealing her true motivations. "You're testifying that your mother deliberately tried to kill you," the defense attorney said. "That's a very serious accusation to make against the woman who raised you." "Yes, it is," I replied. "And it's also true. The woman who raised me died somewhere along the way. The person sitting at that table is someone who saw my success as a threat and my independence as a betrayal. She didn't try to kill me in a moment of rage. She planned it methodically and executed it with precision. The only reason I'm alive is because there was one family in Lincoln Falls she hadn't poisoned against me yet." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, Caroline's face went white. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 8. But the criminal conviction was only the beginning of my revenge. The civil trial began 6 months later, after Caroline had been transferred to the State Women's Correctional Facility. This time, the stakes weren't just her freedom, they were her financial destruction. Rebecca had been thorough in her asset investigation. Caroline's house, her savings account, her life insurance policy, even the joint ownership of Dad's old car that she'd kept hidden, everything was fair game for damages. The jury awarded me $750,000 for lost educational opportunities, medical expenses, emotional distress, and punitive damages. Caroline's house, the house she'd been so desperate to keep me trapped in, was sold at auction to pay the judgment. I bought it myself through a shell corporation, then had it demolished. Where Caroline's prison of manipulation once stood, I planted a garden. But perhaps the sweetest revenge was simply success. Northwestern honored their commitment to reinstate my full scholarship, and I started classes that fall. I majored in psychology with a minor in pre-law, specializing in family trauma and abuse. Every paper I wrote, every case study I completed, was informed by my intimate understanding of how manipulation works and how to recognize it. Ben came to live with me during my sophomore year, after I'd established legal guardianship. Caroline had tried to maintain contact with him from prison, but he'd heard enough of her lies to last a lifetime. He thrived away from her toxic influence, his grades improving dramatically once he was no longer walking on eggshells every day. I graduated summa cum laude and was accepted to law school with a full fellowship. My personal statement had been about my experience as a survivor of attempted murder and my commitment to protecting other victims of family abuse. The admissions committee was moved by my story and my transformation from victim to advocate. 3 years after Caroline's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. It was 4 pages of manipulation disguised as an apology, full of justifications and blame-shifting and requests for forgiveness. She was up for parole in 5 years, she wrote, and hoped we could heal as a family when she was released. I read the letter once, then burned it. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. Caroline had taught me that lesson herself. standing outside her house in my pajamas while she watched me freeze. She'd shown me exactly what family loyalty looked like in her world: conditional, controlling, and ultimately deadly. The last I heard, she was still in prison, working in the laundry and attending mandatory therapy sessions. Her parole application had been denied twice, partly due to letters I'd written to the parole board detailing her continued attempts to manipulate the system and blame others for her crimes. As for me, I now practice family law in Chicago, specializing in cases involving parental abuse and manipulation. My office wall is decorated with my law degree, a photo of Ben at his high school graduation, and a small framed quote that reads, "The best revenge is a life well lived." But sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing case files of other children whose parents have failed them, I think about that blizzard and the sound of doors closing all over Lincoln Falls. I remember the feeling of my feet going numb in the snow and the certainty that I was going to die forgotten and alone. And then I remember the Harris family's door opening, warm light spilling out onto their porch, and Sarah's voice saying, "Oh my God," as she pulled me inside. I remember that not every door in the world is locked against those who need help. That's the lesson Caroline never intended to teach me, but it's the most important one I learned: that survival isn't just about enduring cruelty. It's about finding the strength to build something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. I survived the blizzard. I survived Caroline. And now I help others survive their own frozen moments, their own locked doors, their own families who mistake control for love. The woman who tried to teach me about consequences learned the hardest lesson of all: that some doors, once closed, echo forever. And the sound of justice, when it finally comes, is sweeter than any apology could ever be. Thank you for listening to my story of survival and revenge. I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect with others who've experienced similar situations. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about family dynamics, boundaries, and finding justice when the system fails us. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them.